How's it going? My name's Joseph Boyden. I'm a Canadian writer. I'm a novelist. I'm a short story writer. I've done journalism. I've been a teacher for decades. I'm a father to three amazing boys. And it's a real pleasure to be here today to get to talk to you. I want to thank ArtsCan Circle for allowing me to visit with you virtually. ArtsCan Circle is dedicated to connecting artists to Northern youth, and since this pandemic, have not been able to literally physically visit them. So what they've been doing is via workshop, introducing Northern youth to new artists, and under the hashtag ArtsCan Connects. So remember that hashtag ArtsCan Connects. Please share that with your friends, with your family, with your enemies even. Especially want to give a shout out to some of the communities that ArtsCan Circle works with and hashtag ArtsCan Connects works with. Places I've been to like Fort Albany and Attawapskat in Northern Ontario, Wache, Danny Dutaman, Munish. I want to give a shout out to Pekanjicum up in Northern Ontario as well. Joseph Indigenous, your community is amazing. I also want to give a shout out to Natashish in Labrador, Joe Haven and Nunavut, and Carcross in the Yukon. Those three communities, Natashish, Joe Haven, and Carcross, I really want to get to visit one day. And also I want to give a shout out and thank you to all the youth who might be tuning in, and friends as well, or family as well, that might be tuning in to hear a little bit about what my thoughts on the art of writing consist of. I think I want to begin. I took copious notes, which you'll see over the next 20 minutes or so. But I want to begin with something that's always intrigued me. Whether you're a poet or whether you are a novelist or a short story writer, whether you love writing journalism or you love writing screenplays, whatever that form of writing is that you might really be into, people are always telling you, I think, find your voice. What's your voice? What's your voice as a writer? That's confounded me for a long time, this idea of voice. I'm not a singer, I'm a writer. I've got a blank page in front of me. How am I going to fill this up with any kind of usefulness? It's not about voice to me so much as it is about, I think, vision, or the way we see the world as writers. It's very specific how we see the world. Each one of us sees the world in a different way. Each one of us walks through the world in a different way. I'm lucky enough to have an iMac, one of these fancy new ones with the touch screen thing where the touch button to allow you in. You put your fingerprint on this little thing and suddenly a whole world opens up to you. But you're the only one who can put your finger on that little reader in order to open up that world. And so maybe writing's a bit more like that than finding voice. It's how do you find that fingerprint? How do you show the rest of the world that fingerprint, which will open up whole new universes to them? That said, like I said, as a teen, when I began writing, people were saying, what's your voice? And I was like, I don't know. I don't know what my voice is. Why do you keep saying that to me? I actually, as a teenager, ironically, didn't want to be a writer. I wanted to be a singer. I quickly found out, though, that my singing voice was so bad that even punk rock bands wouldn't take me. So I had to find a new career. What I had been doing, though, was writing down lyrics for songs. And I never shared them with anyone, these little poems and these lyrics. I admittedly, as a teenager, had a kind of a rough time of things. I was suffering at the time from what I didn't know was called depression. I was acting out in ways that were really self-destructive. I did a lot of bad stuff, I was a good kid, but I got into some bad stuff. And the actual act of writing down these lyrics, writing down these songs, writing down these little poems, I remember still to this day, even though I never shared any of them with the world, it was like it was a release valve, a pressure valve that allowed some of this poison out of me, that drew out the poison, some of the hurtful things that I was doing to myself and to others, to actually that act of taking pen or pencil to paper and writing something down, writing down what I was feeling, or the images that came to my head really took a lot of the pain out of my teenage experience and allowed me to see it, to pull away and kind of see it from a bit of a bigger view than just my own little eyes, that vision of that world, and by high school, my last year of high school, I actually took a poetry workshop, a poetry class, and we studied other poets, but then we got to write our own, and that was the first time I actually shared any of my work with somebody else. And it was a liberating experience. It was frightening, really scary to share what I had written, my heart, open up my heart to this classroom of my peers and my teacher. But I found it in some ways exciting. It was a chance for me to say to the world, hey, look, I do have a voice like you've been telling me about. Find it. I'm finding my voice. Can you see it? Can you see my vision of the world? Do you understand, now how I get to look around and what I see through my own eyes? It's different from what everyone else sees. And then I went to university, and I took some writing classes, some nonfiction classes. I took, again, some poetry classes, and I found a mentor. And I'm going to urge you, to find that person if you're interested in writing, that person who will be your cheerleader, be your critic, be a guide. Not always just say, oh, what you've written is wonderful, but be honest. And I found that. I was lucky enough to find a mentor named B.W. Powell, Bruce Powell, who's a professor at York University in Toronto. And he was the only one to ever tell me, up to that point in my life, I think you might have something. You should maybe consider doing more of it. And I was like, really? This is so good to hear. And so I went for it. I then applied for a Master of Fine Arts, it's called, a graduate program way down in New Orleans in Louisiana. And they actually accepted me, which I'm still to this day bewildered by, because I wasn't talented at that point. I didn't feel I was talented. I had never written fiction at that point. But I jumped on my motorcycle with what I could carry, and I moved down to New Orleans, 1,500 miles south of where I was living. And there, in that MFA, I surrounded myself. I was surrounded by like-minded people who travel from all over the United States mostly, but they were there for one sole thing, and that was to learn how to write, to learn how to create better, to find their voice, or for me to focus their vision. And so that's what I did. Admittedly, at first, I was lazy. I turned in stuff late, and I wasn't really focused. I thought I was going to be the next Jack Kerouac, writing these very lazily written travel pieces. And then students around me started getting published, and I realized, oh, there's publishing in all of this, but I couldn't get published. I tried and failed. And then I realized, you know what? This writing thing actually might take a bit of work. And so I ended up having, in my second or third year, investing a lot more time into it. Suddenly I got the bug, as they say. I got the competitive bug. Writing can be competitive. I think you know that as a writer. You might hear a friend gets published and you're like, oh, that's really great to hear. F off, I'm better than you. I'm going to publish twice as much as you. Writers, we have an ego, and that can't be denied. But I got a bit competitive in my MFA program, and I began turning in stories that were from my view of the world, from where I came from in Ontario, people I knew. And there were stories unlike what the others were turning in. Most of these people had never been to Canada. They didn't know where I was from. And so through my stories, I was able to show, not tell, but to show people where I was from. And this ended up starting to get me published in literary magazines. And then suddenly, that was it. I had the bug, I think voice or vision as a writer globally, when you think about it, has to come from inside you. And you're not just going to pick up a rock and say, oh, hello, voice. Hello, vision. It's nice to meet you. It's going to take years and years of honing your craft. And when I say honing your craft, I mean sitting down and writing all the time. Writing's like exercise. You don't want to do it at first, but when you start doing it, it starts to feel good. You release your endorphins, and then when you miss a day, you get mad, and so you work out twice as hard the next day. You start getting lean, you start getting fit, you start getting cut, and that's what writing is like when you're first writing, and when you're writing right through your career. It's the idea of, I've got to do this, and I'm working these muscles that most other people don't even know they have. But I've got to work them in such a way that allows me to present to you what I see. I warn you, just don't take steroids with this kind of writing workout, though. You'll end up like Stephen King, who seems to be putting out a novel every other month. It's amazing that he can do that, but for the average writer, that's not a realistic thing. He's one of those uber writers, and a great one. But don't expect, well, I guess what I'm saying is don't expect success right off the bat, because that's rarely what happens. You do writing because you love it. You write because you have to, not for the prizes that you will be given. I mentioned that to be a writer, you have to have some serious ego, and don't be afraid of that ego. A writer's ego verges on the delusional. How do I take a blank page? How do I take something out of my head, put it onto a blank page, and then present this pages that I've created to you that creates a whole world for you? It's a difficult thing. It seems like magic. It seems like there is magic involved, and I guess there is a little bit, but there's also some very concrete aspects of writing that I'm going to talk about with you in a minute or two. The other part of becoming a writer is reading. You have to read. You have to know what's out there. You have to understand how others are doing it in order for you to do it yourself. There's no way to be a writer without being a voracious reader. I looked at my library today and grabbed a bunch of books that had, or authors that had a huge impact on me over the course of my life. I really wanted to share quickly. I think the first one was The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton. I remember I was probably in grade 5 or 6, my sister Julia coming home. She was in grade 8 or 9, and she was given this book for reading. I kind of borrowed it from her because I saw she wasn't reading it, and I read it within a day or two. I ate that book up, and I was like, who is this S.E. Hinton guy? I love him. And turned out S.E. Hinton was actually a young woman who was 17 when she published her novel, The Outsiders, her first novel. And it's a novel that changed my life. It made me for the first time say, that's what I want to do with my life. I want to learn how to do that. And I think the next book that came along that had a huge impact on me was in my teens. It's On the Road, kind of a classic by Jack Kerouac, a beatnik of the 1940s and 50s. He writes about a world of traveling and of excess and of sadness. And it's basically a road story that he tells that really grabbed me, because I was a traveler myself as a young person. It remains so to this day. I kept reading, and Ernest Hemingway is another writer that I love, that struck me as, how does this man do this in the most simple sounding prose, create these whole worlds? William Golding, Lord of the Flies, was another book that had a huge impact on me as a young person. He creates this world, this island where these boys have crashed on a plane and become tribes within that island. And then I started writing more, and I began reading other writers, female writers. I was very masculine, heavy as a reader, as a young person. But then I discovered books like the short stories of Alice Munro, talk about creating a world within a short amount of time to create people that are at once completely normal feeling and yet unforgettable. She's a writer I highly recommend if you want to learn the craft. I read her work to try to learn the craft of writing. Somebody else who struck me was Maria Campbell, Half-Breed, a true book, a nonfiction book about growing up as a Métis person. Huge impact on me as well. Opened up my eyes to that world. Another amazing writer for me that I studied hard on my own was Louise Erdrich, who an incredible Anishinaabe writer from the northern United States, who is just a beautiful writer who tells an amazing story. And so what I did over those years, and I continue to do, is read other writers to see what they're doing. So I urge you, if you have a writer you really love, sit down and begin to analyze. What is that writer doing? How does that writer create this magic on the page for me? You're going to find that it's actually very concrete things that writer is doing. Which brings me to, at this point, a couple of the concrete little lessons I want to present to you today. as writers. These lessons are focused more towards fiction, but towards short stories and novels, but they can be applied to nonfiction. They can be applied to screenplays. They can be applied to poetry. I think one of the more concrete aspects of the craft of writing is to begin to understand something called point of view, or POV. Point of view is basically who the story is told by. Whose point of view are we hearing the story from? So on the surface, it seems pretty simple. Point of view, okay, that's the teller of the story. Is it a guy? Is it a girl? Is it a man? Is it a dog? Who is the teller of the story? Oftentimes books will have multiple tellers of the story. But in point of view, very specifically, there are two main types of point of view that I will focus on today because they're the most popular points of view in contemporary writing. The first is first person point of view, which is very straightforward. I think they said at one point, I've read the statistic that 90% of novels published, first-time novels, are written in the first point of view. It's because it's the most straightforward. First person point of view is I, the pronoun I. I went to the store, I bought some eggs, I walked home, I dropped the eggs on the counter, I had to go back to the store because I broke them. It's the I, the pronoun I. The other popular point of view is called third person point of view. And there's substratas of third person, but probably the most popular of third person point of view is limited third point of view. And limited third is simply using the pronoun he or she or them instead of I. She went to the store, she bought some eggs, she brought them home, she dropped them on the counter, she had to go back to the store because she had broken her eggs. He went to the store, he bought some eggs, etc., etc. It's from the point of view of that one person. The world is only seen, what you read is only seen from the point of view of that one narrator of the story. The only difference between first person and limited third person is the switching of the pronoun. So the I, if you want to change, you've got a short story or a poem that's written in I, simply change the I to your chosen or your selected gender and make it into limited third. I love to watch the sea at night. He loves to watch the sea at night. It's first and limited third are incredibly similar except for the switch of pronouns. And I'm going to stop there with point of view, other than to say that there is many different types of third point of view. There's omniscient, which is a third point of view that is like God, that can jump into many different characters at will, that can become a cat at will, can see the world through the cat's eyes. Omniscient point of view jumps around, and it's in third. It's he, it can be she, it can be they. And then there is multiple third points of view, which is if you've ever read a novel with more than one character, more than one protagonist, I should say. The protagonist being the person who tells the story. If there's more than one storyteller in that novel or in that collection of stories, then and used in third, that's going to be a multiple third point of view. But just keep in mind, first and limited third are very similar, except for the switch of the pronoun. The other thing that, for me, that I really want to share today with you is, in a concrete level, is this idea that, the more I read these amazing writers, the more I realized, oh, wait a second, these writers are creating magic, but they've only got a limited amount of building blocks, we'll call them, to create that magic. One way of thinking of it is like, think of a car. A car needs a motor, it needs a transmission, and it needs wheels in order to work. A car, can add in all kinds of fancy things, leather seats and air conditioning and a nice sound system, etc. But in order for a car to operate, it needs a motor, it needs a transmission to transmit that energy from the motor to the wheels to get the car moving forward. Without one of those three things, the car's not going to work. Writings like that with what our building blocks are as writers. We have three things as writers at our disposal. When we sit down to write a short story or sit down to write a scene from a novel, there are three building blocks that you have at your disposal to use, and that's it. One is scene. The second is called summary or exposition. And the third is dialogue. Scene, summary / exposition, dialogue. Without one of those three things, a story or a novel is going to probably break down very quickly if it even gets on the road. But let me explain. Scene. Scene is what's actually happening in the here and now. Think of a play. Think of a movie. You're watching the actor, the character go through things in real life time. That's what a scene is. A scene is it's happening, the action is happening in real time, and it feels real to the reader. So a scene is that. It is happening in actual time and it's playing out in front of our eyes. Something is physically happening. Summary and exposition is what it suggests. Summary is there are times when the scene stops and allows some background information to happen. The character might reflect on, oh yeah, last I'm walking down the road and I'm drinking my coffee. That's a scene. It's actually happening. As I'm walking, I begin to remember that time long ago when I was actually, chasing that skunk. Now we're going into what is called summary or exposition, a memory or remembering a background information that is no longer happening in the here and now. And then I'm back to scene again. I'm walking down that road, drinking my coffee. Oh, and there's Sue. Hey, Sue, how are you? There's the dialogue. I'm doing fine. How are you? I'm great, thank you. Hopefully your dialogue is better than that in your writing. But those are the three things. Scene, what's happening in the here and now. Summary or exposition can take the form of memory. It can take the form of filling in background information. It can take the form of many different ways of providing or expressing information. And then there's dialogue. Now, I'm going to, as an example, I'm going to read just a simple short page from The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, the first great love of my life, this novel. It's a very short bit I'm going to read you, and it kind of captures these three things that I'm talking about. Dali was arguing with one of the nurses when we came in. He grinned at us. Man, am I glad to see you. These hospital people won't let me smoke and I want out. We sat down grinning at each other. Dali was his usual mean, ornery self. He was okay. So far scene, we're placed into a hospital room with this kid walking in on this guy named Dali who wants to smoke. And they're talking in dialogue. Shepard came by to see me a while ago. The other character says, that's what Johnny said. What did he want? Said he saw my picture in the paper and couldn't believe it didn't have wanted, dead or alive under it. He mostly came to rub it in about the rumble. Man, I hate not being in that. Only last week, Tim Shepard had cracked 3 of Dali's ribs. But Dali and Tim Shepard had always been buddies. No matter how they fought, they were 2 of a kind and they knew it. There is some background information. Suddenly we're in summary or exposition. Dali was grinning at me. The writer brings us right back into scene again. Kid, you scared the devil out of me the other day. I thought I'd killed you. There's dialogue. Me, I said, puzzled. Why? More dialogue. When you jumped out of the church, I meant to hit you just hard enough to knock you down and put out the fire. But when you dropped like a ton of lead, I thought I'd aimed too high and broke your neck. More dialogue, but it's doing something interesting. He thought for a minute. I'm glad I didn't, though. So see how it's very clearly we're in scene, and then we have exposition or summary to give us background information, then we have dialogue. But note how they flow together. That is not clunky, bonk, bonk, bonk. Sometimes a dialogue, for example, at the end is giving us some exposition or summary. It's giving us some background information. Scene can very easily slip into a memory or remembering or background information, as background information can easily slip right into a scene again. It's how you balance these three things is almost everything as a fiction writer. Balancing scene, the telling, and the dialogue, and how you manage to do that, how your characters manage to do that, is going to have a huge impact on the reader's experience. I argue very strongly that readers will glaze over. If you've got a 10-page description of a coffee cup and the table that it sits on, which would be considered exposition or summary, it's not happening in real time. It's an explanation of a description of something. If you got 10 pages of that, I'll bet you the reader's going to start kind of, I'm getting a little bit tired of this. I'm zoning out. But if you add in scene and exciting dialogue, the reader's suddenly like, oh, what's going on? Johnny ran down the street. He was being chased. He picked up the coffee cup, threw it at the guy, hit him in the back of the head. This is all playing out in real time. It's suddenly seen, and the reader is once more connected into the work, into the reading, to that experience. So I urge you, scene is probably the most important. You can't separate out the three in terms of they rely on each other, but scene, if you're worried or wondering what should you lean on the most, I would argue it's scene. And then bring in dialogue, bring in the background information as needed, but let things, show things through scene rather than tell. They say a good writer tells, a great writer shows. And so use scene to really bring alive what you're writing. I urge you to do that today as a little exercise. At some point, just grab a pen and paper and actually write out a scene. Nothing but pure scene. No explanation, no telling, no dialogue even. Just write out a scene of something happening in the here and now. And then choose. Do I want to do it in first person? Or do I want to do it in limited third? And try both. Read the scene in first person, then read in limited third and see what the difference is. See how you feel about the difference in the reading. And then introduce a little bit of dialogue. Once you've written that one paragraph or so of scene today, have some dialogue happen. Then maybe if you want to, later today at that point, bring in a little bit of explanation, a little background into what's going on in this world, and then back to scene again. But you'll quickly see once you start recognizing, oh yeah, scene, exposition, dialogue, those are the three things, those are the only three things contained in fiction. The magic happens when the writer brings those three things together in a balance that works so that you're not even thinking about that anymore. You're just engaged. And that's the beauty of writing. I think at this point, that's the concrete. And I think something else really important I want to express today that I have a chance to speak to you about is it's when you're sharing your writing, especially for the first time or early on in your writing experience, it's a difficult thing. It's a scary thing. It might not always turn out as you expected. Usually it's like, oh man, did they ever hate that? Rather than, I knew it, they recognized my genius right away. Sharing your writing is a leap of trust. It's a leap of faith. Choose the people who you want to share your writing with carefully, whether that's a teacher you really care for, or a family member, or a best friend, or even somebody you don't really know, but you know that you always see them with a nose in a book. It's a big stretch to do that. It's a scary thing to do that. I don't have to tell you how many haters there are in the world. There's a lot of people who just want to tear down anything you do create. But the beautiful thing about writing is when you sit down, it's just you and the page. It's just you and your vision of the world, you and your voice, you and you touching that little button with your finger, with your fingerprint to open up this huge world in front of you. And nobody can take that away from you, that act of writing. And nobody can ever tell you what you should or shouldn't write. It's like telling somebody what they should or shouldn't think. Anyone tells you if you write something, oh, you shouldn't write that, or you're no good at writing that, they don't understand the actual act, the actual art of creating, of writing. To write is to go into not just your own mind and the mind of what you've experienced, but to create worlds and create characters from the ether, to pull them down. It might be based on people or inspired by people you really know. These characters, these stories might be stories you've heard or stories you haven't. If you're worried about the stories you're telling and whether you're allowed to, speak to the person who you know understands that story, or maybe even owns that story in some way, and ask their permission. But still, don't ever take the "you're not allowed to do that" as something that sinks into you as a writer, because writing's hard enough. To begin building invisible fences around you about what you're allowed to do or not allowed to do makes things almost impossible. The whole idea of jumping into a book is to experience another world, and that's what we do as writers. I know I've probably already gone about a half hour, but I'm quickly going to read something, because I think that the act of writing and the act of mental health are so inextricably tied to each other, that they're so interconnected, like seen as with dialogue, with exposition, that you can't really walk away from one and leave it sitting. When we write, I know that when I wrote, especially as a young person, and even when I write today, the first thing I think when I sit down to write each morning is I'm scared. Can I do this? Should I do this? Am I able to do this? I never say, am I allowed to do this? Because creativity allows you wherever you want to go. It's more the fact of, or the question of, can I do this today? And it's scary. There is a million reasons in the world that will tell you that you can't create a book, or you can't create a story, or you can't write a poem. But the real reasons are the reasons why you can do that. My laptop's acting up on me, but I know it'll clear itself up in a second, and I'm going to read something to you. Here we go. This is something I shared with an event called We Day. I never got paid by We Day, just to set records straight. Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister, hang in there. But this is something I prepared and read at a number of We Days across Canada over the course of a few years ago. And it captures this idea, I think, for me, of writing and mental health and where the two cross over. I was 15 when I realized something was wrong with me. I wasn't particularly happy at my high school, but that wasn't it. Lots of teens share this feeling. I should have been happy. My grades were good. I was captain of my football team. I'd recently shaved off my really long hair, and the girls seemed to like the new, tough look. I realized, though, that things were definitely not right, because I was hiding something from my friends and family, and it wasn't good. What I was hiding absolutely repulsed and fascinated me at the same time. For a year, I'd been wandering through a place that I didn't know how to describe and didn't realize was certainly not normal. Whatever normal is when you're 14 or 15 or 16 or 48 for that matter. I felt pain pulsing through me. Not physical pain, although sometimes the ache was so intense I couldn't breathe. This pain was a deep sadness that burned just under my skin and made waking up in the morning so hard, falling asleep at night impossible. The pain I felt beat through me had become so intense that in the last year I'd taken to cutting my arms to try to release it, this sadness from my body. I have the scars still, like pale ghosts on my skin. And hear me when I tell you that they never were or are something to be proud of. There was little pride and self-loathing. I went to great lengths to make sure no one would see what I was doing to myself, wearing long sleeves in the summer, not letting anyone reach out and touch me for fear they'd feel the rise or the dampness of the freshly made cut. Hear me too when I say that this hiding, well, it wasn't exactly that. I was hiding from this pain that I didn't understand. I was hiding from emotions so intense that I believed they controlled me and not me them. Of course, this kind of pain must have come to a head. I came very close to making the final and worst mistake ever on my 16th birthday, taking my own life. But that's another story. When it all became too much and my secrets were finally discovered, I was forced to see someone, a psychiatrist. I fought it, this idea of talking, of exploring my emotions. Gross, who does that? I finally did, and it was okay. I found out over the course of painful and scary and beautiful and enlightening years that I suffer from depression. I'm okay telling you that. I'm okay telling you that because I was so desperately never want any of you to feel that taking your own life is the answer. And you know what ended up saving me? When my dark secret was finally discovered, I began writing. At first, I just tried to put words to what I was feeling. These feelings, these words became lyrics for songs, and then poems, and then short stories, and then eventually novels. And what I discovered was that this new way of releasing what hurt just under my skin was so much better, so much more powerful. Secrets I no longer wanted to hide, but instead share with the world. Jump ahead 25 years, it's 2009. I'm officially a successful novelist, having just won Canada's biggest literary prize. I'm traveling the world to really cool places and meeting tons of interesting people. That's exactly when what I call the darkness came back. It hadn't visited me for years. One or two loved ones saw the change that came over me. It was as if the color left my skin, like I was slowly being drained of the life that pulsed through me, painful sadness replacing it. A particular loved one said something to try and help me out of it, reminded me constantly to speak out loud rather than turn the pain inward. She told me to use it as a tool, to vocalize it, to write about it. Maybe, she said, this might help someone else. And so I did. It's not easy to tell people about your weaknesses, but I came to realize that even if one person heard my message and it helped them climb out of that hole, it was all worth it. I tell you this because mental health issues like clinical depression or ADHD or bulimia and anorexia, autism or social anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, drug and alcohol addiction, any of these illnesses, all of these issues, unfortunately carry social stigma. But they shouldn't. We don't make fun of or ostracize people with physical health issues, do we? You got a cold? What a loser. I can't be your friend anymore. I heard you have cancer. I'm sorry, but I'm never going to speak to you again. You broke your leg. Apologies, buddy, but I just don't understand what you're going through, and I ask that you not come near me. My suggestion to you all here today, let's treat mental health issues like we do physical ones, with kindness and empathy, with concern and care. The time has arrived to think differently about something that can affect any of us at any time. And if you feel the hurt I speak of, I urge you to choose the healthy release, the artistic or creative or physical, the positive release. There's such beauty in the world, and so much of it is inside you, just waiting to come bursting out. And so I share that little piece of writing with you because it's writing that touches on, I think, that cross place between our mental wellness and our creativity. When I was growing up, people either said to you things to your face or behind your back. But nowadays, with social media, there's this strange kind of netherworld in between. People aren't really talking to your face on Twitter. They're not really talking behind your back because they know they got an audience. There's something that happens now in social media that can turn really ugly really quick. This kind of herd mentality, this rush to judgment, this attacking of people. If you find yourself in that situation, you got to remember that if someone's really angry at you or is making fun of you because you're feeling pain, it's because that person is in pain. And you got to remember that. And I'm not saying forgive them necessarily, but certainly protect yourself from them. Surround yourself with the ones who know you, who know your feelings, who know what you're thinking, who want to read your writing. Surround yourself by those people. And so my final few words to you today, find a community, find the people you trust, who you want to share your writing with, especially at first. Keep in mind too, your book's not going to write itself. Can't let the million excuses get in the way or you're never going to create anything. Just sit down and do it, even if it's a sentence or two. And remember this too, write for you first. There's too many haters in the world. You can't let them into your house. Write to the ones you love and to yourself first, and then worry about the others later. And always too, fight the cliche. I always tell my students, hone your voice, hone your vision, see the world, tell the world, speak the world in the way that only you can, not the way that you've heard others do it. It's hard work, but it's going to pay off. And with that, I want to say thank you, miigwech, to ArtsCan Circle and hashtag ArtsCan Connects, to all of you youth up in the different communities, to friends, family, haters as well. I hope you got a little bit from this lesson, and I really thank you for allowing me to be a part of it. So thank you. Miigwech.